Most people think losing control of a property happens when someone takes you to court, puts up a fence, or sends an official notice. In my case, it started with something much smaller. A sign. I found it nailed to my front porch the first morning I returned home after 3 months of recovering from open-heart surgery. The sign was clean, professional, and impossible to miss. Silver Pine Shores Homeowners Association Administrative Office. The problem was simple. My Lakehouse was never an HOA office. It was my family's property. My father built that house in 1978 with his own hands. He chose every piece of cedar, every window facing the water, and every board along the dock. There was one crooked plank near the end of the dock that he refused to replace. He always said a perfect house looked like nobody lived there. A family home needed a few reminders that real people had built it. After he passed away, I kept the place exactly the same. My wife, Emily, loved that lake house more than anywhere else we owned. She spent every summer morning drinking coffee on the porch while watching the boats move across the water. Every holiday, she decorated the railing with white lights. After she was gone, the lake house became the one place where I could still feel connected to the memories we created together. That was why I knew something was wrong the second I turned into the driveway and saw 17 vehicles parked across my gravel lot. Pickup trucks, SUVs, cars with HOA stickers on the windows. At first, I thought there had been some neighborhood event, maybe a meeting at a nearby clubhouse. Then I saw my porch. The old wooden welcome sign my father carved years earlier was gone. In its place was a brand new HOA sign with fresh screws and freshly painted letters. I parked the truck and sat there for a moment. I checked my phone. I checked the address. I checked the mailbox. Mercer. Same road. Same property. Same view of the lake. Only one thing had changed. Someone had decided my house belonged to them. I walked up the steps expecting the front door to be locked. I had locked it myself before leaving for the hospital. Instead, the handle turned immediately. Inside, I heard voices. A printer running. Chairs sliding across hardwood floors. Someone laughing. The sound did not belong in an empty lake house. I opened the door and stopped. My living room was no longer a living room. Folding tables covered the floor. Filing cabinets lined the walls. A copier sat beside the fireplace where Emily and I used to place our Christmas tree every December. My family photographs were missing. In their place were HOA maps, violation notices, budget reports, and meeting schedules. Around 20 people sat inside my home, typing on laptops and discussing community business. Nobody looked surprised to see me. That was the strangest part. They did not look like trespassers. They looked like employees arriving at work. A woman in a navy blazer finally noticed me. She stood behind my old dining table, which was now covered with paperwork. "Can I help you?" she asked. I looked around the room before answering. "I think there has been a mistake." She gave me a polite smile. "This is an HOA board meeting. Public comments are scheduled later." I looked at the HOA logo hanging above my fireplace. Then I looked back at her. "You are holding your meeting in my house." Several people stopped typing. The woman tilted her head. "Excuse me. This is my lake house." She smiled again, but this time it was the kind of smile someone gives when they think they are explaining something obvious. "I understand this may be confusing, but this property belongs to Silver Pine Shores now." I waited for her to laugh. She never did. Her confidence was real. That was when I realized this was not a misunderstanding. These people truly believe they own the place. My name is Daniel Mercer, and they had no idea whose property they had just taken over. Vanessa Whitmore did not look concerned. That was the first thing I noticed. Most people would hesitate if someone walked into a room and claimed they owned the building. Vanessa did not. She stood behind my dining table, surrounded by my family's belongings, and acted like I was the person who had entered the wrong place. "Sir," she said calmly, "I understand this situation may be confusing, but the association completed the acquisition months ago." I looked around the room again. The answer was everywhere. The filing cabinets, the office chairs, the printer, the meeting schedules pinned to the walls. This was not a temporary gathering. Someone had been building an operation inside my home. "Months ago?" I asked. "Yes." "When exactly?" Vanessa opened a folder sitting in front of her. She did not even need to look at the papers. "April 14th. I kept my expression neutral. April 14th was not just another date for me. It was the day I checked into St. Mary's Hospital in Madison. It was the morning doctors prepared me for open-heart surgery. My daughter sat beside my hospital bed, and told me to stop worrying about the Lakehouse. She said everything would be waiting for me when I came home. I was not meeting with attorneys that day. I was not signing property documents. I was fighting to recover. But Vanessa said the date with complete confidence, like she had repeated it many times. Who handled the transfer? I asked. Our legal representative. What is the attorney's name? For the first time, she paused. It was brief, almost impossible to notice. But I noticed. I would have to check the records, she replied. I nodded slowly. That answer told me something. If someone legally purchased a property, especially one large enough to become an office, the attorney's name should not be a mystery. I walked farther into the living room. Nobody stopped me. They simply watched. The people who had ignored me when I first entered were now paying attention. They were no longer looking at an interruption. They were looking at a problem they could not explain. Near the fireplace, I noticed a small empty space on the wall. A rectangle of cleaner paint surrounded by dust. A picture had been there for years. Someone had removed it recently. I opened the cabinet beneath the television and found the frame placed carefully inside. It was not broken. It was not thrown away. Someone had hidden it. The photograph showed Emily and me standing on the dock 20 years earlier. The lake was behind us. The sun was setting, and we were both laughing because my fishing hat had blown into the water. Moments before the picture was taken, a woman sitting near the window noticed it. Is that your family? She asked. Yes. She looked around the room. Then she looked back at the photograph. Why would your family picture be here? Vanessa answered before I could. The previous owner left personal items behind. The room became quiet. Not because of what she said, because of how naturally she said it. Previous owner. She was not describing someone who still owned the property. She was describing someone who was gone. I looked directly at her. You know who the previous owner was? Vanessa folded her arms. The property records were handled by our attorney. That was not my question. She clamped her mouth shut. A few homeowners glanced at each other. They were beginning to realize there was something missing from the story they had been told. My phone vibrated in my pocket. It was Rachel Bennett. She had managed the Mercer Family Trust after my father passed away. I had not called her because I wanted a fight. I called her because I wanted facts. Her message was short. Checking county records now. Do not argue. Let them explain. I put the phone away. Vanessa noticed. Are you contacting someone? Yes. Your attorney? Someone who reads property records. She gave a small smile. You should save yourself the trouble. Why? Because the paperwork is already finished. I looked at the HOA sign hanging above my fireplace. Then I looked at the people sitting in my home. They were confident because they believed a document existed somewhere that proved their story. What Vanessa did not know was that paperwork could be checked. And if that paperwork did not exist, every person in that room was about to discover they had been defending something they never verified. Vanessa turned back toward the table and picked up the meeting agenda, hoping everyone would return their attention to the HOA discussion. But nobody moved. The room had changed. A few minutes earlier, I was a stranger interrupting their meeting. Now they were watching Vanessa explain why the person standing inside the house was somehow not the owner. I walked toward the hallway leading to the bedrooms. Vanessa noticed immediately. Where are you going? She asked. I am looking around my house. She stepped away from the table. There is no reason for that. I looked back at her. You said this property belongs to the association. If that is true, you should have no problem with me seeing what changed. She hesitated, offering no rebuttal. That brief silence was enough. I continued down the hallway. The first thing I noticed was the floor. My hardwood had marks from office chairs rolling back and forth every day. The quiet guest room where family members stayed during holidays had become a storage area. The bed was gone. The closet was filled with boxes labeled architectural review, resident violations, and compliance records. My guest room was now an archive for HOA paperwork. I opened another door. The linen closet where Emily kept fresh towels now held printer paper and shipping supplies. In the kitchen, someone had placed a coffee station beside the sink. Disposable cups were stacked neatly beside a machine that had never belonged there. The refrigerator had a printed schedule attached with magnets. Board meetings, committee lunches, staff supplies. They had not simply used my house. They had organized it. Vanessa followed a few steps behind me. You are making assumptions based on appearances. I opened the pantry door. Inside were boxes of envelopes with the HOA return address. Am I? I asked. How long does it take to create an office like this? I do not know. Someone does. I kept walking until I reached the study at the end of the hallway. That room was different. My father spent more time there than anywhere else in the house. He repaired fishing equipment at the old oak desk. He kept handwritten notes in the cabinets. He read by the window overlooking the lake. The brass key still hung beside the door exactly where he left it. A small faded tag was attached. Mercer office. I unlocked the door. Vanessa moved closer. That room contains confidential association documents. I looked at her. My confidential documents. She stopped. Inside, the transformation was complete. My father's oak desk had been pushed against the wall. A large conference table filled the center of the room. Filing cabinets replaced his bookshelves. Whiteboards covered the walls with meeting schedules planned months ahead. This was not a temporary workspace. This was where decisions were being made. On the conference table sat several thick binders. One title immediately caught my attention. Facility Operations Budget. I opened it. The first pages listed monthly expenses. Internet service. Electricity. Cleaning. Copier rental. Office supplies. At the top of every page was the same address. 1847, Lakeshore Road. My Lakehouse. Thomas, I said, looking toward an older board member standing near the doorway. Have you seen these reports? He stepped closer and nodded. Yes, those are regular operating expenses. Did you know the address belonged to me? He looked down at the page again. His expression slowly changed. I thought the association owned the building. Who told you that? His eyes moved toward Vanessa. She answered quickly. Everyone on the board understood the situation. Thomas looked confused. I understood that the transfer was completed. I never saw the deed. That sentence changed the atmosphere inside the room. Vanessa had been speaking as if everyone knew the facts. But now it was becoming clear that some people only knew what they had been told. My phone vibrated. I already knew who it was. Rachel. I opened the message. County records checked. Mercer Family Trust still owns the Lakehouse. No transfer recorded. I read it twice. Not because I doubted Rachel. Because I wanted to understand how far this went. I looked around my father's study. The office furniture. The HOA documents. The budget reports. They had built an entire operation around a property they never legally acquired. I put my phone away and looked back at Vanessa. You said the paperwork was finished. She held my gaze. It is. Then show it to me. For the first time since I walked through the front door, Vanessa did not have an answer ready. Instead, she closed the binder in front of her and placed both hands on top of it. It was a small movement, but everyone noticed. A few minutes earlier, she had been completely confident. Now she was protecting the one thing that was supposed to prove her right. The transfer documents are handled by our legal team, she said. There is no reason for me to carry them with me. I nodded slowly. Then there should be no problem providing them. Before Vanessa could respond, the front door opened. Rachel Bennett stepped inside carrying a thick file folder. She looked around the room and stopped for a moment. The filing cabinets, the conference table, the HOA signs, the office equipment sitting inside my family home. Daniel, she said quietly, I was hoping you were wrong. I looked at her. I was too. Vanessa immediately stepped forward. Who are you? Rachel placed her folder on the table. Rachel Bennett. I represent Daniel Mercer and the Mercer Family Trust. Vanessa's expression changed. This is a private HOA meeting. Rachel looked around the room. It stopped being a private HOA meeting when it moved into my client's home. A few minutes later, Deputy Mark Collins arrived after Rachel contacted him. He expected a simple property disagreement. Instead, he walked into a fully operating office inside a private residence. He looked around before saying anything. Can someone explain who authorized this? Vanessa answered first. The association owns the property. Rachel opened her folder and placed a certified copy of the Mercer Family Trust deed on the conference table. The county records say otherwise. Collins picked up the document and carefully read the first page. Nobody spoke. The room was filled with people waiting for one solid answer. After several seconds, Collins looked up. I do not see a recorded transfer of ownership. Vanessa immediately responded. Because the transfer was completed privately. Rachel nodded. Then there should be a legal record showing that ownership changed. Vanessa crossed her arms. Our attorney handled it. Name? Rachel asked. Vanessa paused. I would have to check. Thomas looked over from the other side of the table. You never told us the attorney's name. Vanessa turned toward him. Because it was not important. Thomas stared at her. It was important if we were approving expenses for property we supposedly purchased. That was the first time anyone on the board directly challenged her. The room felt different after that. It was no longer Daniel against the HOA. It was people inside the HOA questioning the information they had been given. Rachel opened another folder. There is more. She placed several utility statements beside the budget reports. During the 3 months Daniel was recovering from surgery, every account connected to this property remained under his name. Collins looked at the documents. Electricity, water, internet. He looked at the numbers. The usage increased significantly. Because someone was operating an office here, Rachel replied. Vanessa shook her head. That proves nothing. It proves someone was using the building every day while Daniel was away. I looked toward the small security camera above the kitchen doorway. The green light was still on. Collins followed my eyes. Does that camera work? Before I could answer, Vanessa spoke. Those cameras were never active. Collins turned toward her. How do you know that? She stopped. Only for a second. But everyone noticed. Rachel noticed too. She opened her laptop and connected to the security system. Daniel installed these cameras years ago. The recordings automatically upload to cloud storage. The screen loaded. A timeline appeared. Hundreds of motion alerts filled the display. Every day, every week, every entry since I left for the hospital. Thomas leaned closer. You mean the house recorded everything? I nodded. Everything after I left. Rachel looked at Vanessa. The paperwork tells us what people claim happened. The recordings will show what actually happened. For the first time since I returned home, Vanessa's confident voice completely failed her. The security timeline loaded across the screen, and for a moment, nobody moved. Hundreds of recordings appeared in order. Every motion alert, every door opening, every person who entered the house while I was away recovering. The camera had been silent the entire time, recording everything without anyone knowing. Deputy Collins leaned closer. Start from the day after you left for the hospital. I scrolled back. Through the timeline, the first video appeared. My front door opened at 8:12 in the morning. 2 people walked inside carrying folding tables. They did not look around like guests entering someone else's home. They walked directly into the living room and started setting up. The next recording showed office chairs arriving, then filing cabinets, then a large printer being carried through my front door. Nobody asked permission. Nobody called me. They simply moved in. Thomas watched the screen with a confused expression. Who gave them access? He asked. Vanessa answered quickly. The management committee had authorized access. For what? Thomas asked. She hesitated. For association operations. Rachel looked at the screen. Association operations inside a property that was never transferred. Silence hung in the air as the next recording began playing. Vanessa appeared on camera. She was standing in my living room with a clipboard in her hand. She directed volunteers where to place furniture. She pointed toward the fireplace and told someone to move a filing cabinet closer to the wall. Then she walked into my kitchen and organized office supplies inside the cabinets. She was not visiting. She was managing the move. Collins paused the video. What date is this? I checked the timestamp. April 17th. Rachel looked at Vanessa. 3 days after the supposed ownership transfer. Vanessa shook her head. That does not prove anything. Collins looked at her. It proves the office was already being created. I continued scrolling. Another video appeared. Contractors were standing on the porch. One man measured the wall while another removed my father's wooden welcome sign. Megan, one of the homeowners, quietly spoke from behind us. They removed that. No one murmured a word. The recording continued. The old wooden sign was carried away. A new HOA sign was installed in its place. The same sign hanging above my fireplace now. The same sign I saw when I arrived home. Rachel paused the video. That installation was planned. Vanessa folded her arms. The office needed proper identification. The office that legally did not exist, Rachel replied. Thomas picked up the utility reports again. Wait. He looked at the dates. The internet upgrade happened before this. Rachel nodded. Yes. She placed another document on the table. The copier lease started before the public announcement that the association owned this property. The room became quiet again. Not because there was no answer. Because the timeline was answering for them. The office came first. The paperwork came later. I looked around at the people who had been sitting in my living room all morning. They were no longer looking at me like I was confused. They were looking at the evidence. Megan picked up a reimbursement form. These expenses were paid using HOA funds. Rachel nodded. Correct. Megan looked toward Vanessa. You told residents this building already belonged to the association. Vanessa took a breath. That was my understanding. Thomas looked down at the approval signatures. But you signed these payments. Vanessa stared blankly, unable to justify her own signature. The security footage continued playing. Another recording appeared. This one showed several volunteers carrying boxes into my father's study. The label on the largest box was clear. Mercer Office Records. I stared at the screen. They had not only turned my home into an office, they had started using my family's name as part of their operation. Collins paused the video again. We need to preserve every recording. Rachel nodded. Agreed. I looked at Vanessa. For the first time since I entered the house, she no longer looked like someone controlling the situation. She looked like someone realizing every decision she made had left behind a record. She looked around the room, but nobody was waiting for her explanation anymore. The videos had changed the conversation completely. Before, the question was whether I owned the Lakehouse. Now the question was how long the HOA had been operating inside my home and who had approved every step of it. Thomas picked up the reimbursement forms again and carefully reviewed each page. I want to see every payment connected to this property. Rachel nodded. That is exactly what we need to review. She opened another section of her file and placed several documents across the table. Electricity, water, internet service, cleaning, equipment rentals. Every statement showed the same address. 1847, Lakeshore Road. My Lakehouse. Deputy Collins looked through the pages. These expenses were paid by the HOA? Yes, Rachel replied. But they were paid for a building the HOA never legally owned. Thomas continued reading. His expression changed with every document. Office furniture, printer supplies, maintenance service, conference equipment. He stopped at one page and looked closer. Commercial internet upgrade. Megan leaned toward him. When was this approved? Thomas checked the date. His expression changed immediately. April 10th. He looked toward Vanessa. That was before the transfer date you gave us. Vanessa responded quickly. Preparing a location does not mean anything. Organizations prepare spaces before official changes happen all the time. Rachel looked at her calmly. That is true. Preparation alone does not prove ownership. She tapped the documents. That is why we are not relying on preparation alone. She turned the laptop toward Collins. We also have access records. I opened the smart lock history connected to the security system. Every entry appeared with a date, time, and access code. Maintenance codes, temporary guest codes, committee access codes. Collins studied the list carefully. Then he stopped. What is this? I leaned closer to the screen. A maintenance code I had disabled almost 2 years earlier had been activated again. That should not be active, I said. Rachel looked at the account history. Who restored it? I opened the change log. The answer appeared beside the request. Silver Pine Shores Management. Thomas looked directly at Vanessa. You restored access? Vanessa shook her head slightly. The office needed regular entry. Thomas looked confused. The office you said already belonged to the association? Vanessa stood frozen, trapped by her own digital footprint. Collins continued reviewing the records. This shows someone restored access privileges to a private property without the owner's approval. Vanessa folded her arms. The transfer was already underway. Rachel pointed toward the screen. A transfer being discussed does not create ownership. The room became quiet again. Not because there was nothing left to say, because the dates were telling their own story. The office existed. The access was restored. The expenses were paid. All before anyone could prove the association owned the property. I looked back at the security timeline. One date stood out. April 18th. Rachel noticed it too. Open that recording. I clicked the file. The video showed people entering the house throughout the day. Boxes were carried inside. Furniture was moved. Documents were placed in my father's study. Then Vanessa appeared with a stack of papers in her hands. She walked directly to my father's old desk and began organizing them. She did not look uncertain. She did not look like someone waiting for permission. She looked like someone who believed the room already belonged to her. Thomas watched the screen quietly. That is not someone preparing to move into a new office. He looked toward Vanessa. That is someone who already believes they own the building. Vanessa immediately responded. You are misunderstanding the situation. Thomas turned away from the screen. Then explain it. For the first time, he was not asking me. He was asking her. Vanessa looked around the room. The same people who had followed her instructions for months were now waiting for answers she could not provide. Rachel closed the laptop. There is still one question we need to answer. Collins looked at her. What question? Rachel glanced toward the folder containing the transfer agreement. Who created the paperwork that convinced everyone this property had changed ownership? Vanessa reached for the folder containing the transfer documents before anyone else could touch it. These documents were prepared properly, she said. You are questioning a legal process without seeing the full picture. Rachel did not argue. She simply looked at the folder and nodded. Then let us look at the full picture. Vanessa handed over the documents with the confidence of someone who believed they would end the conversation. Deputy Collins took the first page and began reading. A tense hush fell over the study. I watched Vanessa carefully. For the first time that day, she was not relying on her words. She was relying on a piece of paper. That paper was supposed to prove everything. After a minute, Collins looked up. Mr. Mercer, have you ever seen this agreement before? No. Did you sign anything transferring ownership of this property? No. Collins handed the document to me. At first glance, it looked official. My name was printed clearly. Several pages had initials. A signature appeared at the bottom. It was designed to look complete. But there was one problem. It was not my signature. I placed the document beside an older trust agreement Rachel had brought from her files. Compare them. Thomas leaned closer. Megan stepped around the table to see. The difference was not obvious to someone who did not know me. But I did. I had signed my name thousands of times. My signature has always followed the same pattern, I explained. Especially the capital M in Mercer. I pointed at the transfer document. This one is different. Vanessa immediately responded. People's signatures change over time. Rachel nodded. That is true, but this document has another problem. She turned to the final page. Deputy Collins, can you read the notary information? Collins looked down. Linda Harper. Rachel opened another certified record and placed it beside the agreement. Linda Harper retired from the county clerk's office 11 months before this document was supposedly notarized. The room changed instantly. Nobody needed a legal explanation. The date alone created a problem. Thomas slowly looked at Vanessa. You told us this was finalized. Vanessa answered quickly. That was the information I received. From who? Thomas asked. Vanessa looked away. Collins carefully placed the document back on the table. This agreement will need further review. Vanessa stepped forward. Are you saying I created a false document? Collins remained calm. I am saying we need to determine how this document was created and who prepared it. Rachel opened another folder. There is something else. She placed a copier installation agreement beside the transfer document. The service address was my Lakehouse. The installation date was clearly listed. Thomas read it once. Then he read it again. This was installed before the transfer date. Rachel nodded. Correct. Megan looked between the papers. So the office existed before the association supposedly owned the building. The pieces fell into place without needing further discussion. The timeline was becoming clear. The HOA moved in first. The paperwork appeared later. A homeowner near the back of the room picked up the budget reports from earlier. Wait. She turned another page. These expenses were approved before April 14th too. Thomas looked at Vanessa. How many people knew this was happening? Her heavy silence said more than a denial would have. The room that once followed her instructions was now filled with people checking records for themselves. Rachel turned back to the security system. There is one more place we should look. She opened the search function connected to the archived recordings and digital files. Within seconds, a folder appeared. The name was simple. Mercer Acquisition Plan. A profound, heavy silence settled over the room. Vanessa looked at the screen, and for the first time all day, her confidence disappeared. She knew exactly what that folder meant. The folder name remained on the screen. Mercer Acquisition Plan. Nobody reached for the keyboard. Nobody needed to. The words alone changed the atmosphere inside my father's study. Thomas read it again slowly. Acquisition. Vanessa stepped closer. That is just an internal planning folder. It does not mean what everyone thinks it means. Deputy Collins looked at her. Then explain what it means. Vanessa opened her mouth, but no answer came immediately. That was the first time all day I saw her lose control of the conversation. Rachel clicked the folder open. Inside were dozens of files organized by date. Moving schedules, equipment orders, contractor notes, budget projections. The first document was titled Office Transition Timeline. Rachel opened it. The list was simple. Install internet service. Move filing cabinets. Set up conference area. Replace exterior signage. Convert private study into administrative workspace. Thomas looked at the dates. His expression changed. These were created before the transfer date. Rachel nodded. Exactly. Vanessa shook her head. Those are planning documents. Organizations create plans before things happen. Rachel looked at her. That is true. But these documents describe actions that were already completed. She opened another file. A photograph appeared on the screen. It showed my living room before the conversion. The fireplace. The family furniture. Emily's chair near the window. Then the next image appeared. The same room after the conversion. Folding tables. Filing cabinets. Office equipment. Someone had documented the entire transformation. Megan stared at the screen. Someone took pictures of replacing his home with an office. No one could defend the indefensible. Rachel silently opened another document. This one was a meeting summary. The title read Transition Strategy Discussion. She scrolled down slowly. The notes described how residents should become comfortable using the location as the HOA office before ownership questions were raised. Thomas leaned closer. Before ownership questions were raised? He looked at Vanessa. What does that mean? Vanessa crossed her arms. It means nothing. You are interpreting words without context. Thomas continued reading. Establish regular operations so the community accepts the location. He looked up. That sounds pretty clear. The room stayed quiet. Not because nobody had anything to say. Because everyone was realizing they had only been given one version of the story. Rachel opened another file. This one contained future budget estimates. Monthly costs for utilities. Maintenance. Office supplies. Cleaning services. Every expense used my property address. Every projection assumed the HOA would continue operating there. Collins reviewed the document carefully. How far into the future did these plans go? Rachel answered, 5 years. That number changed the room. 5 years was not a temporary arrangement. It was a long-term plan. Then Rachel opened the final file. An email chain appeared. The subject line read Future Community. Facility. One message asked whether Daniel Mercer might object after returning home. The response came from Vanessa. By then, residents will already depend on the location. Reversing the decision will be difficult. Thomas stepped back from the table. He looked at Vanessa differently now. Not as the HOA president. As someone who had made a decision without having the authority to make it. You knew I would object. Vanessa looked at him. Thomas, you are misunderstanding the situation. No, he replied quietly. I think I understand it now. One by one, the homeowners in the room stopped looking at the documents and started looking at Vanessa. The same people who had trusted every decision were now asking their own questions. Megan picked up the budget reports. How much money did residents spend operating this office? The question hung in the quiet air. Collins simply wrote something down. That will be part of the investigation. Vanessa tried to regain control. Everything we did was for the community. I looked around my father's study. The room where he repaired fishing reels. The room where he kept family records. The room where he spent quiet mornings looking at the lake. Now it was where someone planned how to make my own property feel unavailable to me. A community cannot be improved by pretending someone else's property belongs to you, I said. Vanessa met my gaze, entirely stripped of her earlier defiance. Outside, a county vehicle pulled into the driveway. The investigator had arrived to collect the records and preserve the digital evidence. The meeting had started with Vanessa telling me to leave my own house. It was ending with everyone waiting for her to explain why she believed she could take control of it in the first place. The county investigator spent the next several hours documenting everything inside my lake house. He photographed the filing cabinets, the office equipment, the meeting schedules, and every document connected to the HOA operations. Nobody tried to stop him. The arguments were over. The explanations were over. All that remained were records. Vanessa stood near the fireplace where the HOA logo still hung above the place my father's fishing clock used to be. For the first time since I walked through the door, she was not looking at the room like she controlled it. She was looking at it like she had to explain it. Thomas was the first board member to speak. He removed his HOA badge and placed it on the table. Daniel, I owe you an apology. I looked at him. You believed what you were told. He nodded slowly. I did, but I should have verified it before approving anything. That was the difference between a mistake and a decision. Some people in that room had trusted the wrong information. Others had created it. Rachel gathered copies of the deed, financial records, camera files, and planning documents. "The county will complete the review," she said. But the timeline is already clear. Over the next few weeks, homeowners throughout Silver Pine Shores received the results of the investigation. They saw the documents. They saw the dates. They saw how the office was created before the association had any legal right to use the property. The special HOA meeting was held in the community center this time, not my lake house. That detail mattered to me. A community meeting belonged in a community building. A private home belonged to the person whose name was on the deed. Residents asked questions that should have been asked months earlier. Who approved the move? Who authorized the expenses? Who created the transfer documents? Why was everyone told the property already belonged to the association? Vanessa answered some questions. She avoided others. But the confidence she once had was gone. The residents voted to remove the current leadership and rebuild the board with stricter rules. Every major property decision would require verified records. Every agreement would need proper documentation. No one would rely on assumptions again. Several board members resigned. Thomas stayed temporarily to help organize a new election process. A month later, I returned to the lake house with a small toolbox. The first thing I removed was the HOA sign from my porch. For screws. That was all it took. For screws holding up a symbol that had caused months of confusion. When the sign came down, I ran my hand across the cedar boards underneath. The wood was still the same. The porch was still the same. My father's house was still there. I repaired the small holes and brought back the old wooden welcome sign he had carved years earlier. The one that belonged there. Inside, the transformation took more time. The filing cabinets left first. Then the printer. Then the conference tables and boxes of paperwork. Slowly, the rooms became familiar again. My father's oak desk returned to the study window. Emily's chair went back beside the fireplace. Our family photographs returned to the walls. The fishing clock went above the mantel again, and the quiet ticking filled the room like it always had. That evening, I walked down to the dock before sunset. The lake was calm. The trees reflected across the water. The crooked cedar board my father refused to replace was still beneath my feet. I smiled because he had been right. Some things are worth keeping exactly the way they are. Looking back, the strangest part of the entire situation was never that an HOA tried to use my property. It was how easily people accepted the story because someone presented it with enough confidence. A sign does not create ownership. A meeting does not create authority. A claim repeated enough times does not become the truth. Records do that. Deeds do that. The law does that. In the end, the HOA did not lose because I was louder than they were. They lost because they built their entire plan on a property they never owned, and they chose the one homeowner who would take the time to prove it.